early morning hours of August 13th, 2018, a seemingly ordinary man kissed his pregnant wife goodbye, or so he would later claim. What unfolded next would shatter that illusion and ignite a nationwide obsession with betrayal, murder, and a mask of normalcy. Chris Watts appeared to live the American dream in Frederick, Colorado. He had a steady job with Anadarko Petroleum. He lived in a well-kept suburban home with his wife Shanann and their two daughters Bella and Celeste. Their Facebook life was polished. Family vacations, happy selfies, birthday celebrations. But behind the screen was a man drowning in secrets. When Shanann returned home from a business trip at around 2 a.m. on August 13th, surveillance footage captured her entering the house. That footage would be the last known image of her alive. Later that morning, a friend grew concerned when Shanann missed a scheduled OB/GYN appointment and didn't respond to messages. She contacted the police. A wellness check was performed, and Chris answered the door, strangely calm. He claimed Shanann had taken the kids to a friend's house, but her car, purse, and phone were still at home. From that moment, cracks began to show. Chris gave a TV interview pleading for his family's safe return. To some, he looked devastated, but to others, there was something off. Too rehearsed, too emotionless. Investigators noticed it too. On August 15th, Chris agreed to take a polygraph test. He failed, and when confronted, he confessed, but only partially. He claimed he had killed Shanann in a rage after witnessing her strangling one of their daughters. This story would later be exposed as a lie. The truth, as it unraveled, was far more chilling. Chris had been having an affair with a co-worker, Nicole Kessinger. He'd told her he was separated and close to finalizing a divorce. In reality, there was no such separation. Texts and phone data showed Chris searching for secluded vacation spots, looking up jewelry, and deleting conversations. He was building a new life, one that didn't include his wife or children. The full confession came during further interrogations. He admitted to strangling Shanann, who was 15 weeks pregnant with their son Nico, in their bedroom, wrapping her body in a sheet and placing it in the back of his truck. He then drove his daughters Bella, age 4, and Celeste, age 3, over an hour to a remote oil field where he worked. There, he smothered them, first Celeste, then Bella, and placed their bodies into separate oil tanks. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave nearby. The premeditated nature of the crime, combined with Chris's emotionless demeanor, horrified the public. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated erasure of an entire family. As investigators pieced together Chris Watts' story, the timeline became undeniable and chillingly deliberate. He murdered Shanann in the early morning hours, just hours after she returned home from her business trip. Then he loaded her body into his truck, with his two daughters alive and riding in the back seat next to their mother's corpse. They drove for over an hour to a remote oil site where Chris worked. Along the way, Bella reportedly asked, "Is Mommy okay?" Chris would later admit that both girls were quiet, possibly in shock, but alert and aware. Once at the site, Chris first buried Shanann in a shallow grave. Then he turned to his daughters. He smothered Celeste first, using one of their blankets. Bella, who had watched what happened, reportedly begged for her life. According to his confession, her last words were, "Daddy, no." He killed her anyway and placed both of their small bodies into separate oil tanks. The tanks' narrow openings were only 8 inches wide. He forced their bodies in. For days, Chris denied everything. He maintained his story to friends, neighbors, and Shanann's grieving family. But as police reviewed phone records, GPS data, and surveillance footage, his lies unraveled quickly. Nicole Kessinger, his mistress, cooperated fully with authorities. She had already begun to suspect something was wrong when Chris failed to act concerned about his missing family. She discovered through the media that he was still married and had never filed for divorce. Her search history showed that she had looked up wedding dresses and phrases like, "Man I'm having an affair with says he will leave his wife." But once the news broke, she went to the police. Chris eventually pleaded guilty to all charges to avoid the death penalty. His confession spared him from execution, but cost him everything else. On November 19, 2018, he was sentenced to 5 life terms without the possibility of parole, 3 consecutive, 2 concurrent. plus 84 additional years for other charges related to unlawful termination of a pregnancy and tampering with a deceased body. The aftermath left the public reeling. People weren't just disturbed by what Chris had done. They were haunted by how normal he had seemed. There were no prior signs of violence, no reported abuse, no cries for help from Shanann or the children. To everyone watching, he was a family man. That illusion, shattered by the weight of the facts, made the betrayal even more profound. The case gained widespread attention through the Netflix documentary American Murder: The Family Next Door. Using real texts, social media posts, and police footage, the film painted a picture not just of a crime, but of a man who wore a perfect mask until it cracked completely. To this day, Chris Watts remains imprisoned at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, far from Colorado, for his own safety. He's in protective custody, isolated from the general population. He has reportedly found religion behind bars and exchanged letters with women who see him as misunderstood. For the rest of the world, though, the image is clear. Chris Watts destroyed an entire family in silence. And for what? A fleeting fantasy of freedom and a clean slate, purchased with the lives of the people who loved him most. As more details surfaced, public outrage only grew. People weren't just disgusted, they were obsessed. Comment sections, forums, podcasts, and YouTube videos dissected every moment of Chris's body language, every text message between him and Shanann, every slip in his interviews. It became one of the most analyzed family murder cases in recent history. Shanann's life came into sharper focus in the aftermath. She wasn't just the victim of a horrific crime. She was a mother, a wife, a woman who documented her life passionately online. Her videos showed her as hopeful, loving, and at times overwhelmed by the pressures of her marriage. She had spoken about Chris being distant before. Friends recalled her worrying about their relationship, but never in a way that suggested danger. Text messages later revealed Shanann had confronted Chris in the weeks prior. He had become cold, withdrawn, and physically intimate less often. She told friends she felt like he didn't love her anymore, and she was right. But she never could have imagined the depth of that rejection. The public's reaction wasn't just outrage, it was heartbreak. There was something about the simplicity of the betrayal, the loss of trust, the erasure of a family from the inside, that made people feel personally affected. The Watts case became a grim reflection of how quickly a picture-perfect life can turn into something unrecognizable. Even the police and FBI agents involved said they were shaken. Many described Chris as unnervingly calm, even pleasant, during interviews, right up until he broke down and confessed. That mask of normalcy never fully dropped, even as he detailed the deaths of his wife and daughters. There were no signs of struggle, no bruises, no fights beforehand, just quiet annihilation. And despite his confessions, Chris's version of events is still debated. In a prison letter written months after sentencing, he claimed he had been possessed during the murders. He wrote that a dark force had taken over him, but no psychological diagnosis has ever supported that claim. The evidence pointed not to a sudden break, but a gradual, planned erasure. This wasn't a man who snapped. This was a man who made a choice. He chose lies over truth, silence over help, death over discomfort. Chris Watts now sits alone in his cell, visited by no one. Shanann's family continues to grieve, though they've spoken out publicly in hopes that her story might help others recognize warning signs in seemingly perfect relationships. In the end, there's no justice that can undo what happened, no sentence that can restore what was taken. But what remains, the texts, the footage, the voices, ensures that Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico are remembered not for how they died, but for the lives they lived. This has been Abstract Pulse. Subscribe for more true crime overviews, and thank you for watching.